Ready to try using two circulars to knit a pair of socks? That's what we're tackling in this video tutorial. You'll learn how to knit a pair of socks from cuff to toe using the two circulars method. Hey nerdy knitter, Tanya here. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a master hand knitter, and I believe knitting is a form of self-care. You can take time for yourself and your creative hobbies like knitting, still create beautiful garments that you love to wear. And in this video tutorial, it's all about knitting socks using two circular needles. We're going to knit a pair of socks from cuff to toe. We've got lots of different things going on in the construction, and you can find the pattern for this linked down below. It's a sock pattern that comes in 11 different sizes, from a tiny little baby sock all the way up to an adult man large size foot. So you can grab that pattern, your two circular needles, and your sock yarn, and let's knit a pair of socks from cuff to toe using the two circulars method. I just finished weaving in the ends on the final sock, so let's take a little quick look at the construction before we get into knitting this. So we're starting at the cuff, just a simple 1x1 rib long tail cast on. You can substitute whatever cast on you like as long as it's stretchy enough. And then we're doing a short row heel, so wrap and turn short row heel. And we have a little mini gusset here because sometimes the short row heel can be a little tight right here across the instep. So if we add a little extra space right there, it won't be so tight. If you don't need a gusset in there and you like your short row heels just the way they are, then you can skip that part of the process and it's totally fine. But I like that little mini gusset in there. I have a high instep and it really helps with that. And then along the top, we just have this simple lace panel. Very simple, 14 stitches across, 12 rounds to work, and then you're just going to knit that for the length of the foot. After we finish the short row heel, we decrease away those gusset stitches and we just knit the length of the foot. And then the socks are finished with anatomical toe shaping, so they are specifically right and left toes. You can see they've got this sharp decrease edge on each side and a more rounded spot for the big toe right here. So let's get into knitting these socks. For this tutorial, we're going to use two circular needles. Now, as far as length is concerned, 16 inches is just fine. You could probably even fit two socks on here at once. So two 16-inch circulars, or if you want them a little longer, that's totally fine as well. Or use a 16-inch and a 24-inch, whatever you have in your needle collection. So I'm using US 1 or 2.25 millimeter. That's what I like for knitting socks, but any needle size that will give you between 7 to 9 stitches to the inch for a nice sturdy sock. So for me, that is a US 1, 2.25 millimeter. So two needles because we're going to use the two circulars method. We're also going to need stitch markers. We're going to need a lot of them. You're going to need one to mark the beginning of round, a locking marker that you can stick right in your sock. Or you can just use the yarn tail. The beginning of round isn't going to move. It's going to be on the side with the yarn tail. But I like to have a locking stitch marker that I can use. We're also going to need 6 more stitch markers. We're going to need 2 to separate out our lace panel, 2 more for our gusset stitches when we're working those, and then 2 more for the heel stitches. So when we have them all going on, we're going to need 6 going on at the same time. So 6 stitch markers that you can put right on your needle cord. And of course, we're going to need a tapestry needle and some scissors or snips to weave in our ends at the end and finish off with our Kitchener graft on the toe. And also, we're going to need some yarn. So of course, you want some sock yarn, something that's appropriate for socks. I'm using Alley Cat Yarn's Smooth Sock. This is a blend of superwash merino wool and nylon. So a skein of that is generally plenty, depending on how long your foot is or how wide your foot is or how long you want your sock leg to be. But in general, even for my wide size 9.5 inch foot, I can get a pair of socks out of one skein, 100 grams of sock yarn. But if you want to knit like a longer leg, you might need more yarn. So it really varies depending on what you're planning to knit. First step is to actually cast on our stitches. We need to cast on for the cuff of our sock right there. So any stretchy cast on will do. I'm going to use the long tail cast on, but if you have a preferred cast on, then go right ahead and use that. So you're going to need your 2 circular needles and your yarn, and I've already pulled out a long tail. So your stitches for your sock are going to be divided in half. You'll have half the stitches on one needle and half on the other. So you could cast them all onto one and then slip half of them to the other needle, or equally divide them as you're casting on. So I have to cast on 72 stitches for my sock. So that is 36 on each needle. So get my yarn. And of course you start with a slip knot or something. I just skip it. So when you're holding long tail cast on, you hold it like this. The working yarn is draped over my finger and the tail is over my thumb, and I grip them underneath. It sort of makes a slingshot. And we just take our needle, scoop it down and up, and that puts a stitch on the needle. And then from here, we come between the stitches or the strands of yarn on the thumb. We're going to grab the yarn over here and scoop it up just like we're making a stitch. Come back through and we can tighten that thumb yarn. And then we repeat that for every stitch we need to cast on. So that's 2 stitches on my needle. I come up in the center of this loop, grab that yarn, pull it through. There's 3. 4. Under the thumb in the middle of that yarn, scoop up that stitch, pull it through. There's 5. 6. And I'm just going to continue this until I have all the stitches that I need. So there is half my stitches on this needle. So I'm going to just grab the other one and sort of hold it right beside this one, and then just start casting onto this needle instead. So get back in my position and then just use this needle tip. Oops. Try that again. That first one can be a bit weird, but it's just hold them together and you're scooping onto that second needle tip instead. Pull it snug so you don't end up with some sort of ladder right there, and then just continue. So there are all my stitches. I can slide everything up right now. Get myself all set up to join in the round. So that's the next thing to do. My tail is still quite long here, so I'm just going to snip it shorter. So I don't need all of that tail, and I don't want to accidentally knit with that. So I'll just get rid of some of that. Okay, so right now we just want to sort of lay things out. There's my working yarn. It's attached to this needle up here, and this is the needle we're going to start knitting across. So the deal with 2 circulars is when you're working the stitches on this needle, you use that same needle tip. So I'm going to slide my stitches up, and that's the needle. I'm just going to use this needle. I'm ignoring this needle back here for now. The only needle I'm using is this one. So that's your one rule when it comes to using 2 circulars. So I like to lay things out, make sure everything looks nice and flat and not twisted, and I can push these stitches up onto my needle. Make sure when you're working your cast on, you're not working it super tight, because this gets more difficult to move your stitches around if it's very tight, and your cast on edge won't be loose enough to get over your foot. So for my first stitch, I always like to use the tail and the working yarn together. Now make sure they are both right there. They're not wrapped around this cord. They're right here, just like that. Nothing's twisted. So I can hold it close, and I'm just going to knit with both of them, the tail and the working yarn, for this first stitch. So just enter that stitch, scoop up both of those, and of course it can be a little bit finicky that first round getting yourself all set up, but we want to get joined in the round. So grab that yarn. My stitch just came off my needle, so I'm going to put it back on there and try that again. Checking again to make sure I'm not twisted around my needle here. Nothing's twisted, so I'm grabbing that yarn, scooping both the tail and the working yarn, and pulling them through just to get me joined, and I give it a good tug. Then we can drop the tail and just grab our working yarn, and we're going to work in knit 1, purl 1, rib. So that was my knit stitch. My next stitch is a purl stitch. So bring that yarn to the front, So I'm just going to work in knit 1, purl 1 across these stitches. So this is the end of needle 1. So I can slide them up on their needle. I can flip things over. Can slide these stitches up. Remember, we're using this one needle. We're ignoring this back needle now, just using the front needle. Making sure nothing is got twisted right here. And we're just going to continue in that knit 1, purl 1 pattern. So the first stitch, I don't try to work it super tight because then it gets sized. This stitch on the back will get really small and it'll be harder to push it back up onto the needle tip. But you do want to hold them sort of close together, and that can avoid any sort of like ladders you might get right there. So I kind of snug it up. I'm not yanking on it, but I want that stitch to be close to this back cord back here, but not so tight that I can't move my stitches back up onto the needle later on. So that's the end of the round right there. So turn things over. Everything looks good. That yarn tail, I can like pull down down here out of the way. For now, I'm going to use that to mark the beginning of round. Later on, when I have more stitches here, I'm going to put a stitch marker there. But right now there isn't much, and we still have a big gap right here. So I want to make sure I'm fixing that as I knit this next round. So the back needle, stitches can come up. Now I'm all wrapped around that needle. So I want to unwrap. And I don't want to come like this because that's going to, if you look at the cord right now, you can see I'm going to end up with a yarn over on that needle. So I want to make sure I'm coming up between the needles and it's laying over the top right now, right there. So I take that front needle, I grab the other end of it, slide these stitches up because I'm just using this one cord. That other cord is just hanging out back here. If you accidentally grab a different tip, it's not the end of the world. You'll find out you'll end up in the magic loop position instead. Everything will be on just one needle and you'll just have to readjust things. It's not the end of the world. You're not going to lose all your stitches, but you just want to pay attention to the needle that you're grabbing. You're always working with one needle at a time. So slide those stitches up. And we're going to just continue working our rib pattern for about 1 inch or so till the cuff is done, and then we'll set up for our lace panel for the sock. So this first stitch, we can see it's got looks like 2 stitches coming out of it right there. Because we use the tail, you can see we've got 2 stitches here. So I'm going to snug that up with the tail, and I'm going to enter both of those and knit them together. And I just like to use that tail when I'm first doing that. I think it just helps close things up. And then we will just continue working across at normal tension. And we're just going to keep working our knit 1, purl 1 rib until our cuff is about 1 inch or as long as you want it to be. I finished my cuff. I'm back at the beginning of round. There's my tail, so I know that's the beginning of the round. I'm going to put a marker here now. Either one works. You can use the tail to mark it or put a marker just so you know where the beginning of the round is. So our sock is divided into 2. The first needle is going to be the heel. We're going to work with the heel across this when we get to the heel, of course, and then needle 2 is going to be the instep or the top of our sock. We're going to have a lace panel on there. So on this round, we're just going to knit around, but we're going to place some markers to separate those stitches for our lace panel, which will start on the next round. So across needle 1, we just need to knit. Make sure you're grabbing the correct needle. So you're always using the one needle. The other one's just hanging out in the back. This is actually easier if you have 2 different needles. It's easier to tell which is which. But as long as the needle tip sizes are the same. So I'm just gonna, I started purling and working in that rib. I'm gonna take these stitches out. Okay, so I just want to knit to the end of needle 1, and then on needle 2 we're going to place our markers for our lace. Okay, so that's needle 1, turn. Now on needle 2 we want to separate out the center 14 stitches. So depending on how many stitches you have for your sock, you're going to start with a different amount. because I have 36 stitches right here, I want to separate out the center 14, I have to knit 11. So there's my first 11. I'm going to place a marker, and then I'm going to knit 14. This is the same for every size. It's the same lace panel for all the sizes. So 14 stitches. Place a marker here, and I should have another 11 right here. Yes. So we want 14 in the very center, and then the remainder of your stitches is divided equally on either side. Okay, so now for our lace, we're going to start that right away. So we're back on our heel stitches, so we're just going to knit across. Now on needle 2, we're going to start the lace across those center 14 stitches. So stitches on either side are just going to be knit. And then over those 14 stitches, we work that lace panel. So round 1 is knit 1, yarn over, knit 3 together. Yarn over, knit 3, yarn over, slip, knit 2 together, pass that stitch over, yarn over, and then 4. And I like to stop and make sure I didn't miss a yarn over. There should be 4 yarn overs on every round, so your stitch count will remain the same. Yep, that looks good. So I can knit to the end of the round. And that is it for the lace panel. So you would just continue knitting and working that lace panel, the next round of it, on the next round. And there's only lace worked on the odd numbered round, so this next round, round 2, is just knitting. So I'll be knitting all the way around on my sock. Now we've got to talk about the gusset. And the gusset, you want to hold off on this until your sock is about 1 3/4 inches to just about 1 inch less than you want for the total leg. I like a shorty sock, so I'm going to be starting mine right away, but it's going to add a little bit of length to the leg itself. So that's really customizable. If you want a longer sock, then knit your leg longer, and the pattern will tell you when to stop. For the smaller gussets, it's about 1 inch. For a larger gusset, it can be up to like 1 3/4 inches. That's how much length we're going to be adding right here to the sock leg before we start our short row heel. So you're adding this little bit right there. And what we're doing is adding a little bit of extra fabric with some increases right here, and then we'll be decreasing them away after our heel. So we're just adding about 1 inch or so, a less or more depending on your sock size, just adding a little extra fabric across that instep. So you're going to start this when the leg of the sock is 1 inch to 1 3/4 inches less than you want for the total length up to that heel that we're going to start right about here. So that's totally customizable. I like shorties, so I'm going to start mine right away. We're going to need 2 more markers for that. So we're going to put these stitches on this instep needle. So on the heel side, we're just going to knit across. So making sure I'm just using this one needle. The other one's hanging out, pushing all my stitches up, grabbing the yarn, and I kind of pinch things. I don't want a ladder right here. I don't seem to get ladders with this kind of setup. I do with like magic loop and DPNs, but I'm less likely to get them here. But you do want to keep things close where those needle joins are. Don't be super tight, because then the stitch back here can get too tight and it'll be harder to push it up onto the needle later on. But this first stitch, I do sort of snug it up beside the stitch on the cord, and then I just keep knitting. I'm not knitting super tight. I just kind of snug that stitch up a little so it's close to the stitch that's back here. So across this needle, we're just going to knit. Okay, then on needle 2, we're going to start adding some stitches for that little mini gusset. So we're going to add them right along the edge on each side. So we're going to place a right lifted increase right here on this edge. So we look at the stitch that's on our needle, and we want to catch this part of the stitch that's underneath, that right leg of the stitch, put it up on the needle, knit into it, use your finger to keep it separate from the actual stitch, and then knit the stitch that's beside it. And now we can place a marker. So we're using one of our stitches to start our gusset here. Then we're going to knit to our lace panel, and then whatever round you're on that lace panel, you're just going to continue working that across those 14 stitches. So I am on round 3, so I'm just going to work round 3 and make a note of that. So if you know, because we're going to work our increases for our gusset on every other round. So I know when I'm working a lace round, that's the round that I'm going to be working my increases on too. Just an easy way to try to remember which round you're on. Okay, so there's my lace panel, and I'm going to work another increase at this other edge, and this side I want to work a left lifted increase. So we need to work that in this last stitch. So for the right lifted increase, we needed this leg of the stitch. We need the other side, but we can't get to it yet. So we have to knit this stitch, which moves it down by 1. We're not working into this leg of the stitch. That's the stitch we just worked. So we need to go down 1. It can be a little difficult to see this first one right on the edge. But right here, there's the stitch we just worked. The stitch underneath that one is right here. So I'm going to grab that, and the right leg is in the back, so I'm going to knit into the back of it. Oh, I forgot to place my marker. So I'm going to just slide these two over, put my marker in there, and then slide them back. So there we go. Now we are set up for our gusset stitches. So we're working our lace here in the center, and we'll be working gusset stitches on either the sides right out here at the edges. So I have to knit 1 round, and then we'll work the increase that we'll use for our gusset. That sort of just sets us up. We're not going to work the rest of them right there along that little edge, but that gets them in the right position. So we're just going to knit 1 round, and then we'll come back and work our next gusset increase. Now we're ready for our first increase round that we're going to be working until we have all the stitches we want. So I've knit across my heel stitches, needle 1. Now I'm on needle 2. This is where that increase is going to happen. So we're going to knit to the first stitch, which right now is just 1 stitch away. So knit to 1 stitch before the marker. We're going to work that right lifted increase. So the stitch that's beneath the one on the marker, or the one that's on the needle, we pop it up on there, keeping it separate. Knit into it, then knit that stitch and slip the marker. Then we're going to knit and work our lace panel. And I know that when I'm working my increases on the same round, I'm working a lace stitch pattern, not just my plain knit rounds. Okay, lace panel is finished. Now I'm going to knit to this next marker. Okay, and we want to work our left lifted increase in this first stitch right here, but we want to work it in this leg of the stitch, but we can't get to it yet. So we've got to knit it, and that moves that stitch down. Now that stitch is the one we just worked. So we're coming down right here and grabbing this one, knitting into the back of it, and then knitting that one. So that is how our gusset increase round is going to work. So I'm just going to knit around and repeat that gusset increase round until I have the stitches I need. For my gusset, that's going to be 8 stitches. I'll have 8 stitches on either side. So I'll have 8 stitches here, and I will have 8 stitches here. And then it's time to work our heel. So you're just going to keep working these gusset increases until you've added your gusset stitches. Then we can move on to working our short row heel. Once the gusset's finished, it's going to look like that along this side where you've been increasing on both sides. Now it's time to stop and work the heel. So we're going to be working back and forth just on these stitches. We do have to do one round first to set up. So on this round, we're going to place some markers. Basically, we're dividing our heel into 3 equal sections, more or less. If you have an equal number of stitches, like I do, I'm going to put 12 stitches in each section. If you have like 1 extra stitch, that can go in the middle. If it's unequal, then you could put an extra stitch on each side and have 1 less in the middle, as long as they're pretty much divided into thirds. So we're going to do that now. That's our setup round, and then we're going to start our heel. So there's my second marker placed. I'm going to finish knitting this side of the stitches and then turn and knit across my instep. I'm going to follow the next round of my lace panel. Then I'm going to make a note of the round I'm finishing on because I want to start again right where I left off on that lace panel. We're going to just be working back and forth on our heel for a while, but then when we resume knitting in the round, we want to just pick up right where we left off. So as you're working this round of your lace, make sure you make note of that, so when you come back to knitting in the round, you can just pick up right where you left off. So now it's time to just work back and forth on this needle right here, and we're going to ignore the instep while we work our heel. So we're going to work wrap and turn short row. So we're going to knit to that last stitch, and then we're going to do a wrap and turn. So I'm coming up to my last stitch on this side. So what I want to do, the yarn's in the back, slip that stitch purlwise, bring the yarn to the front, slip it back, and then bring the yarn between the 2 needles to the back. And that first stitch has been wrapped. So we're going to turn, we're going to purl across to the last stitch on the other side, and we'll repeat this. Coming up to that last stitch. So the yarn is in the front right now. Slip the stitch, yarn to the back, slip it back, bring the yarn between the 2 needles. And now hold it there. We don't want to lose that stitch. Turn. And now we're going to continue doing this process. I'm going to work to 1 stitch before this wrapped stitch, and we'll repeat all of that. So as you're working back and forth, give that a little tug and pull it firmly. We don't want to have any gaps right here. So pull that first one firmly. And I'm going to knit to the 1 stitch before the last wrapped stitch. And coming up to that wrapped stitch, I know it's the very last one, but so right there I can see there's a wrap around the base of that stitch, and this is the next one I want to wrap. So slip the stitch, bring the yarn to the front, slip it back, bring the yarn to the back between the needles. And then as I purl across, I'm going to pull that pretty firmly so I don't have any holes or anything right there. Just as I do that first stitch, I'm giving it pretty good tension right there, and then go back to my normal tension. So let's repeat that on the purl side. Purl to the wrapped stitch, or 1 stitch before that wrapped stitch. Coming up to the end here. Now it's more difficult to see the wraps on this side because we're on the reverse stockinette side and they can sort of blend into the fabric. So you just have to sort of pay attention. And if you have to, you can turn it around and look at the other side and see if it's a wrapped stitch or not. So I'm where I need to be, the yarn's in the front, slip the stitch, yarn to the back, slip it back, yarn to the front between the needles. Hold on to that, pinch it there, pull it firmly as I knit across. So I'm just going to keep repeating this until I have wrapped all the stitches over here and all the stitches over here, and these stitches in the middle won't be wrapped. So that's all you have to do, work back and forth, creating your wrap and turns until you've wrapped all the stitches on both sides. So I finished the first half of the heel, and you can see everything is wrapped. We've got a bunch of wraps here. I just did my last one. So if you look close, you can see they have little wraps of yarn underneath. And now we're going to work the second half of the heel. So I just did my last wrap. I'm right here, so I'm going to work a right side row, knit across these center stitches. Okay, so I'm coming up to that first wrap. And I can remove this marker now. We're done with that one. We'll just use our wraps as our guide at this point. So the first thing we want to do is resolve that wrap. To do that, we're going to pick it up and we're going to knit it together with the stitch. So I like to just insert my needle into it and then into the stitch and wrap the yarn and just pull it through both of them. Just like that, and give it a tug. Pull it tight. And now we're going to wrap this stitch. It's already got a wrap, but we're going to give it another one. So it's going to be double wrapped. So slip it, bring the yarn to the front, slip it back, bring the yarn to the back. So we have finished, resolved that one, and we've double wrapped this one, and we're going to do that on the other side as well. Giving that a firm tug as I hold it there. Okay, I'm coming up to this marker. So I can remove the marker. We're done with those. And we want to do the same. We've got to pick up this wrap, but we're going to pick it up from behind. It's right there. Pop it up, purl it together with that stitch. And now we want to wrap this stitch, but I got to bring my yarn to the front. We purled that stitch, so now we slip this one, yarn to the back, slip it back, and yarn between the two needles. So now this one's been double wrapped. It's hard to tell from this side, but when you turn and look, you can see now it's got the wrap underneath here, and now the wrap we just created. So now we're just going to work back to that other wrap stitch. Pull it firmly on that first stitch, and then knit to that double wrapped stitch. Okay, so you want to pay attention. You don't want to knit right by it. There's our last one. We can see right here, there are two wraps right there. So we're going to insert into both and into our stitch and try to draw our yarn through. This can be a little bit tricky with that extra wrap, but then there we go. And then we're going to wrap this stitch. So everything's going to get double wrapped as we go, and then we'll repeat this on the other side. So I'm working my way back, and it's harder to see where that wrap stitch is, but I can see a gap right there. So I know it's going to be close, pulled close to the stitch beside it. So it's right, this stitch right here before the gap that I know I've got to work up to. So we stop, and we've got to find both of those wraps. It can be helpful to turn your knitting around and look for them this way. They're right here. So now that I can see them, I can sort of flip things around, find those two wraps, maybe put them up one at a time on my needle till I get them both. Get them up there and then purl them all together. And then wrap the next stitch. My yarn's in the front. Slip the stitch, yarn to the back, slip it back, bring the yarn to the front. Turn, and I'm going to keep repeating this, resolving each of those double wrap stitches until I get to just one on each side, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to avoid the holes. So we'll just continue knitting back and forth until we have done all of our short row shaping. I just finished my last wrap right here on this side, and I've got one left over here. So now that we're done with those, we have to resolve these last two, but then we want to close up the holes, so we're going to work one on each side of the instep as well. And then we can start knitting in the round again and get rid of our gusset stitches. So let's walk through all of those steps. Right now I'm just knitting up to this last double wrap stitch. Okay, so here's that last stitch. There's the two wraps. So that resolves that one. Now what I want to do is turn, and we are going to just wrap this first stitch on needle 2. So sort of slide it up, and all we want to do is hold the yarn firmly, slip that, wrap it just like we would every other stitch, bring it to the back, and now we can slide them back on their needle because we're going to continue working in this direction again across our heel stitches. And doing that little wrap on that first stitch is going to help close up any holes right there. So make sure I've got the right end of my cord, and I'm going to purl across to this last wrapped stitch, and we'll repeat that on the other side. And I'm working that first stitch, I'm pulling it firmly. I want to close up any holes right there. Now here's my last wrapped stitch on this side, so I want to find both of those wraps and get them up on my needle. There we go. Now I can purl them all together. And that takes care of that. Now I want to do the same on this side. I'm going to slide the instep stitches onto their needle, and I'm going to wrap and turn this last stitch on needle 2. So I'm pulling tightly on that, slipping this stitch, bringing the yarn forward, slipping it back, bringing the yarn back, and now I can put them back up on their cord and go back to knitting in the round. And I'm at the beginning of my round again. We've just wrapped that stitch, so I'm going to keep it firm, and I'm going to knit across all of my heel stitches. We're going to resume knitting in the round. So holding that firmly as I work that first stitch so we can avoid any holes right there. So everything on this heel side is done. We just have 2 more wraps, but they're on the instep needle. So we're just going to knit across our heel stitches. So there's the end of needle 1. And now we're done with our heel. We're going to turn and work across needle 2. But we remember we have those last 2 wrapped stitches here. And we also have our lace panel. So whatever round you ended off on, you want to start with the very next round. So the first one is our wrap and turn that we did right here. So just like we did before, we're going to pick up that wrap and insert into the stitch as well, knit them together, pulling it firmly so it's close to the heel stitches back there. And then we're going to knit across and work our lace panel. I'm on, let me see, round 5, so I have a lace stitches to work right there. So I'm almost at the end of needle 2 and the end of round, and of course I have that final wrapped stitch right here. So we have to find that wrap. It's in a different direction, but we're still going to do the same thing. We want to go into the wrap, into the stitch, and sort of knit them together. The stitch has been knit. Now let's see if I can pull that wrap up and over my stitch. And there we go, and that completes the last one. So now we've finished the heel. We've done all of our shaping. It's hard to tell right now, but hopefully that closed up any holes. We just want to give it a firm pull as we knit across our heel again. So the next thing we need to do is to work our foot. And we want to work that to the length that we need before we need to work our toe. That's all spelled out in the pattern. The toe is quite long because we're doing that anatomical shaping. We also want to get rid of these gusset stitches, so that's the next thing we're going to do. So we're going to just knit on needle 1 again. Nothing happening here, just going to knit. Knitting that first stitch firmly. Coming up on the end of needle 1, so I'm going to turn. And on needle 2, we're going to start decreasing our gusset stitches and get rid of those stitches. So we're going to knit to 2 stitches before this gusset marker. And then knit 2 together. And then maintain the pattern to the next gusset marker. So just knitting these stitches, and then slip that marker and work an SSK. So we're decreasing 1 stitch at each end of our gusset So an SSK on this side and a knit two together on the other. So we're going to slowly get rid of the stitches, these extra stitches on the sides, and the next round is just a knit round, so I'll knit all the way around, maintain my lace in the middle, and then the round after that I'll repeat this decrease round, working a knit two together by this marker and an SSK by this one. And I'm going to repeat that every other round until I have one stitch left on each side over here. And then I can just remove my markers and continue knitting the foot. I've got one more gusset decrease to do right here, so we're going to work that. And we can take out these markers. So my last gusset decrease, knit two together, get rid of that marker, and then work in pattern to the last gusset marker. And we can take this marker out and last decrease. So now that the gusset stitches are all gone, you should be back to your normal stitch count. So I'll double check and make sure I should have 36 stitches on this side and 36 on the other. And now at this point, you're just going to keep knitting until the leg of the sock or the foot of the sock is as long as you need it to be, minus what we need for the toe shaping. And that's all spelled out for you in the pattern. It's quite a long toe. The smallest size, you'll need about an inch. The larger sizes, it goes up to about 3 inches because of that. Because the toe starts way back here, so we've got a lot of shaping to do. But that's spelled out in the pattern, so you would subtract that total for the toe from the total length you want for the sock and continue knitting the foot until it is that length. So I've got quite a bit more to keep knitting right here before I can start my toe. Now it's time to knit our toes, and we are going to do some anatomical toe shaping. That means there's going to be a specific toe for the right toe and then a specific toe decreases for the left toe. So here's a pair that has this, and you can see on the right toe we've got this slant going in this direction, and then we sort of finish off at the top, rounding on both sides, but it's straight here while this side slants. And on the left it is the opposite. You can see the slant is here, and then we have decreases on both sides right at the top, but this side is straight. So we're going to have two different instructions for our toes so we can get this right and left toe. So let's start with our right toe. So to do that, let's pull this one back out. We're going to start by decreasing just along one edge, just along right here, to give us that curve along the outside edge of the foot. This side's going to be straight for a while, and then we'll be decreasing on both sides up here. But for now, we're going to just be decreasing along one edge for this side, for this right sock. Okay, so I'm on that first side. I'm coming up to these last 3 stitches. So I'm going to knit 2 together, knit 1, and I'm going to decrease right at the beginning on this side. And of course, we're going to mirror our decreases. So we did a knit 2 together. Now we want to do an SSK. So I'll knit 1, SSK, and there are 2 stitches decreased, and that's it. So those decreases are worked along this edge on both needles. So I'm going to just continue knitting across here. Now your lace panel, if your toe is very long, and you can check the pattern for this, you can continue the lace down into the toe for a few rounds if you want to. I've finished mine, so I'm just going to knit straight across, so I can remove these markers now. But that's all you're going to do. Your pattern tells you how many times you need to do just this 2 decreases right here on this side. In my case, I'm going to repeat this until I have 54 stitches. I have 72 right now. Well, I have 70 since I just decreased 2 stitches. So I'm going to repeat this and keep repeating this round every other round. So my next round, I'm just going to knit, and I'll repeat this until I have 54 stitches left. So I finished part 1 of my toe, and I need to correct something I said. I did decide to continue on with the lace because this toe is such a long toe. it can look a little odd if you finish it too early. So I do have some instructions in the pattern just to continue your lace for a little bit. You'll have your markers here, and you can see that as you get closer and closer to the marker that's right there, because you're decreasing these stitches away. When you have just a few left, that's a good time to stop with the lace and then finish the rest of the toe. So that was part 1 for our right toe. Now we have to move on to part 2, and we're going to decrease on both sides to get that toe shaping. So we're at the beginning of our round. So on round 1, we're going to knit 1, SSK, and then knit to the last 3 stitches. Last 3 right there, so knit 2 together and knit 1. And now I'm going to repeat that on needle 2 across the instep. Same thing, SSK on this side, knit 2 together on this side. So I've finished round 1. Now I have to work round 2. Round 2 is just knit around. So I'm going to knit all the way around. So that was round 2, just knitting. Now round 3, I am just going to repeat round 1. So SSK, knit 2 together, and then repeat that on the other side. So I'll be decreasing another 4 stitches. So that was round 3. Now for round 4, we're going to do a little bit different for this round. We're not going to knit around. We're going to do another decrease right here on this edge. So it sort of makes this side of the toe curve a little bit more. So we're just going to be decreasing on this end on both sides of the needle, but not on this side. So for the right toe, this is going to be different obviously for the left toe, but for this one we're going to knit 1, SSK, and now I'm going to knit to the last 3 stitches, not on this needle, but I'm going to finish knitting on this needle, turn my work, knit across the instep, and when I get to the last 3 stitches for the round, we're going to knit 2 together over there. I'm at the end of the round, so I'm going to do that other decrease right here. So we decreased 2 stitches on this round. So now I'm going to repeat rounds 3 and 4. So round 3, I'm decreasing 4 times, 2 on each side, and then on round 4, I'm decreasing just along this point right here on both sides of the sock. So I'm going to repeat both of those rounds twice more, then I'm going to repeat round 3 once more, and then we're going to graft our toe. So here's the right toe. Now we're going to continue with the left toe, and it's going to be the mirror image of this one. So we've got this long decrease line here on the outside edge of the right foot. We're going to do that on this side for the left sock. So this is the first part we're working on, just this, and then later on we'll work some decreases on both sides. But while we're working this, we're going to continue our lace pattern. I forgot that when I had started my right toe, and then I went back and I fixed it because the toe shaping is so long. It starts right here. It's quite a long toe that it can look a little weird if you don't continue some of that stitch pattern down into it. So we start here at the beginning of round, which is across the heel. So we're going to knit 1. And then work an SSK, and then we have to knit all the way around to the very back to the beginning of round, minus 3 stitches. So I'm going to work this SSK without splitting these stitches. There we go. I'm going to knit to the end of this needle, and then turn my work and knit to the last 3 stitches on needle 2. So I'm on the end of needle 2, I've got 3 stitches left. I'm going to knit 2 together and knit 1. And then this next round, I'm just going to knit, and then I'm going to repeat this decrease round. So I'm decreasing just along this edge, an SSK on this side, working all the way around, and then a knit 2 together. And it's going to mirror this shaping. I'll get this slant along this outside edge for the left toe. So that's the first half of our toe shaping for the left toe. We've finished this, and we still have some stitches left. Now we're going to do like a rounded top right here. So what we want to do for that, round 1, we're going to decrease 4 stitches. If you've ever done a toe shaping before, then you'll recognize this because it's pretty standard for most toes when you're working from the cuff to the toe. So we're going to knit 1, SSK, and work to the end of this first needle to the last 3 stitches, and knit together and knit 1. That's 2 stitches decreased. Now we're going to turn. We're going to do that on the other side of the sock as well. So same again, SSK at this end and then a knit 2 together at the other. So our last decrease right here. There we go. And now round 2, we are just going to knit. So knit all the way around on round 2. Now I'm back to my next round, round 3, and this is going to be the same as round 1. So 4 decreased stitches. So an SSK, knit 2 together, and then repeat that on the other half of the sock. Now for round 4, we want to do a little something different. We're going to work an extra decrease right here. Instead of just knitting a plain round, we want to round our toe right there on this edge, on this left toe. So to do that, round 4, we're going to knit to the last 3 stitches on the first half of the sock. So right here, we're going to knit 2 together, knit 1, turn, and on the instep, we're going to work that decrease right here along this edge. So we're going to knit 1 and then SSK and knit to the end of the round. So just 2 stitches decreased on round 4, but it gives us a more rounded toe for our big toe on the left foot. So we're going to repeat rounds 3 and 4 2 more times. So a round where you're decreasing 4 stitches, so on each side of the toe, and then on round 4 where you're just decreasing along that big toe edge. So we're going to repeat that 2 more times, and then repeat round 3 once more, and then we'll be ready to graft our toe. Ooh, that's some strong yarns. I better snip it. Okay, thread that onto a tapestry needle. I think in most instances, if you want to measure it out, if you do about 3 times the circumference, you should have plenty, but this looks about right to me. So we have to turn our work. The yarn's attached to that back needle. So we're going to slide our stitches up onto the needles. And it's a 2-step process. Now in the normal Kitchener graft, you have a setup and then something you do at the end. We're going to skip those because they can leave like little ears on the sides of our toe, and we don't want that. So we're going to skip the setup. If you're used to doing that, go ahead and do it if you want. It's totally not necessary. So we're going to start with our front needle and we're going to work 2 stitches. The first step is to make sure we're attached to the back here. Now the first thing we do is insert into this first stitch, like we're going to knit it, and we're going to drop it right off the needle. And then we take our needle and we turn it this way, and we insert into that next stitch as if we're going to purl, and we leave it on the needle. We draw our yarn through. Now don't tug or pull tight. Remember, we're making another row of knitting. We're not pulling it tight to make a seam. Now we do this on the back, but we reverse it. We start with a purl stitch. So insert as if to purl, pull that off, insert as if to knit, but leave it on. That's all it is. And then pull the yarn through. We're not making it super tight. And we go back to the front. So knit, drop it off, purl, and keep it on. On the back needle, purl, drop it off, knit, keep it on, and draw the yarn through. If you're not sure if you have to put this down and come back to it later, then your yarn is attached to the last stitch that you worked. So the last one we worked was back here. So now we need to come to the front. Knit off, purl, and leave it on. Purl off, knit, and leave it on. And you just continue this until you have finished all of the stitches. So I'll come back here when we have just 2 stitches left, and I'll show you how we finish it up. Okay, coming up on my final 2. So we're going to repeat the process, but this time we can just drop all of the stitches off as we finish working them. So this front needle, knit off. Last stitch, we're just going to purl and drop that one off. And our back needle, purl off, and then knit, and we can drop that one as well. Okay, I like at this point, before I bring the yarn to the inside to weave in the end, just to look at my graft. It's a bit loosey-goosey over here, so I can take my tapestry needle and I can kind of shift some of that extra yarn all the way over. It's only a few stitches, so take a few minutes to do this. It just makes it a little neater. So I just shift the excess yarn all the way over to the tail, then I can pull it out. Or if it's a longer graft, just sort of move it around so it redistributes through the stitches around it, so you don't end up with some very large stitches. But this is a pretty short graft, so I can just move it along right here. There we go. That neatens it up a little bit. So there's our graft finished. It's still a bit loose over here, so I might go back in and pull that. Yeah, that one's pretty loose, so I'm going to pull some of that extra. But that's all I've got left to do, and then weave in the ends. While you're working on your pair of socks, why not continue hanging out with me? I put together this short playlist with some knit and chat episodes where we discuss lots of different sock knitting topics. How to care for your socks, how to choose the best sock yarn, what you can do to make sure your socks are going to last a long time. So click right there and I'll see you in the next video.